Welcome back to just another solar podcast with Luke Beattie, that's me, and Karl Jensen.
That's me.
How's it all going in Melbourne, Karl?
Luke, it's been freezing this week. Absolutely freezing. And a bit of rain thrown in there for good measure, which is the first bit of rain we've had in quite a while. But seems that it just hasn't stopped in Queensland or New South Wales.
Well, that's been the story of the whole year. I think I heard on Solar Insiders that up till a couple of weeks ago, around the Lake Macquarie area, there were only 17 working days that weren't affected by rain.
It's a lot of rain.
Last episode, we had Knackers on and we were talking about the issues with the compliance of inverters under the new standards and the issues with the current ratings of the inverters. In 2 weeks, a lot can happen. In the last 2 weeks, we've seen, well, most notably, the Smart Energy Council jumped in there, engaged at the grassroots, engaged with manufacturers and with the regulators. And I have to say kudos to John Grimes and the team there, because they actually, they're an industry body that collects membership fees, and actually they're engaged with the grassroots, coming up with resolutions. Saw the same with the DC isolator issue last year and the inbuilt DC isolator issue. So the industry is thankful that some people are there trying to resolve it. Their suggested way forward, or the negotiated resolution, is that manufacturers can put forward a declaration saying that their inverters are capable of managing higher current, and that should be enough.
I don't think this one's over until the fat lady sings. There's certainly been lots of talk amongst manufacturers, and at first glance, I've sort of said, Fronius is the answer. So I think it's really important that until the dust settles, people really do their best to try and actually adhere with panel and inverter combinations that do work with the existing spec sheets, just in case. No one wants to go back, particularly to change an inverter for one that's now secondhand. It becomes worthless. I think the best advice that the Just Another Solar podcasters can come up with is proceed with the extreme caution until the dust settles. So I don't think the dust has settled yet. Whilst there are some manufacturers' declarations out there, I've also heard that there are some bodies that aren't going to accept that. It's not over yet. We're still in it.
I think that's the biggest issue, that there's still ambiguity around it. So just reading from the release from the Smart Energy Council, they said, while there is no mechanism to allow an official ruling to be made on the issue, we've liaised with relevant stakeholders who are supportive of the resolution outlined above. So they're basically saying if the manufacturers say it's good enough and they've got a declaration to say it's been tested to be able to cope with that, then design installers may be able to lean on that. It's just ambiguous. The other thing that they say is that
no one's sticking their hand up saying they're taking full responsibility for it. Like,
but here we are again. We had the same issue with the inbuilt DC isolators where it's not clear. And once again, the Smart Energy Council did well to push in all the right places and engage with everyone. But ultimately, it comes down to what the inspectors and by extension, the regulators are going to accept. And it's still not 100% that they're going to accept declarations. They're going to accept something outside of, a hard enforcement of this.
Yeah, look, I think it's been a fun week for installers, in that obviously we're now installing under the new standard, well, at least for the last 10 days or thereabouts. And I think that the inspectors in Victoria have definitely been briefed on things to look for. I don't think that anything's been passed this week. It's just been a case of going to have to go back and fix this and fix that. So it's been a tough week for installers, no doubt. And whilst we touched on cable 10 days ago as well, there's a lot of angry people out there about how much cable it just turned into garden lighting.
Well, I'm going to blame you, Karl, and myself, and top to bottom for the industry, because the standards were published last year, and certainly we put our heads in it. Manufacturers, distributors, installers, designers, regulators, everyone's had their head in it, and we still seem to have been somewhat blindsided.
I'm kicking myself I didn't actually do Glenn's course. At the end of the day, we told everybody that it'd be a good idea to do Glenn's course. I should have done it myself, and then at least I would have had a whole day and a half to sit down and read it. But of course, we're always flat out busy, which means it's read a little bit here, read a little bit there.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, it didn't connect the dots. But
and then you work out how to do the calculation, but who overlaid that on top of the existing products and data sheets and modules and inverters?
Indeed.
So once again, I blame you, I blame myself, and top to bottom, we've got to get better at doing this.
But we're still doing it. So there's still inverters in the market that have a running current rating of, say, 16 amps and a short circuit current rating of 20. That IEC standard says we should be testing it to 1.5 times. If we have a inverter with a max running current of 16, we should be seeing an ISC rating of 24. But we're still not there at that. Let's hope that there's a bit of stability and we can stick with the current generation of panels for a couple of years.
I spoke to 2 inverter manufacturers during the week, and they both said the same thing, that there's already tolerance built into their testing. Yeah, we're just hoping for a good outcome here. The best point that the Smart Energy Council made is that, quoting again from their release, we need to fix this hot mess. The regulation of distributed energy resources like solar panels and inverters and the standards process for them is broken. It must be fixed.
Yeah, look, I think that's kind of passing the buck. We all had an opportunity for industry comment, and I'm guessing the rest of the industry was just the same as us. I think Nigel Wilmot on the WA Installers Facebook group jumped in there and said, hey, all we've done here is aligned it with the IEC standard. We haven't invented this. And you go, well, I guess there's nobody to blame but ourselves for not reading it and the inverter manufacturers for not. But it is what it is. We're in it now. We'll get it fixed eventually.
Yeah, so we're hoping that the resolution of the SEC is going to hold water and that regulators will accept it, but it's still something that people should keep an eye on. I was astounded by how many people I spoke to in the last fortnight, and they were blissfully unaware of this situation with the inverters, blissfully unaware that they're required to do something with their DC ISO shrouds, to have longer ones or enclosed ones. And once again, there's some ambiguity around that. The people who are actually looking into this and aware of it and concerned about it are already 10 steps ahead of those who are blissfully unaware.
Well, did you know, Luke, that with that isolator shroud standard, if you mount the isolator facing north, it needs to be in the middle. But if it's east, it should be offset one way. And if it's west, it should be offset the other way.
And have you seen the width of these shrouds? They're enormous, mate. They're almost half a metre.
It's like a cricket bat.
It's a cricket bat. And I mean, the old shrouds weren't too offensive, but they still stuck out a fair way in these things now.
Look, is what it is. At the end of the day, I guess that'll push people more towards the disconnector, as in MC4s. And I think putting the MC4s under a weather shield at the end of the array isn't actually a terrible idea. There it is, easy access. We can see them. That's a good nesting place for spiders and things.
It's not liable to catch fire if it gets water ingress.
Yeah, not the end of the world. What isn't the end of the world either, but could be very good for our industry, is we're watching on TV constantly about price increases. And for the first time ever, a CEO of Reamped gets on TV on the morning show and actively tells customers to F off because they're losing money hand over fist. And he said, look, our rates are going to go up by 100%. So we're telling people they should go and seek out a better deal and move providers while they still can. What he meant to say was, if you don't piss off in the next week, we're going to be broke.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're not the only small retailer in that position. They haven't got any hedging in place and they're susceptible to spot pricing, which is...
Well, they've saved customers millions of dollars, as they said, and then now is no longer an opportunity for them to save millions of bucks. But the other interesting one is the gas price. So gas is traditionally in Victoria somewhere between $6 and $10 a gigajoule. A couple of days ago, the spot price hit $700 a gigajoule, so up by 7,000%, not 40%, 7,000%. So the AEMO stepped in yesterday and pegged the price at $40 a gigajoule. And I think that it will be $40 a gigajoule for the rest of winter, which means that gas prices at a retail level just went up by at least a factor of 4 on gas.
That's phenomenal. And I think before we continue on with energy pricing, it's a good opportunity to introduce our special guest today. So today as special guest, we've got Ben Hutt, the CEO and Managing Director at Evergen. G'day, Ben.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, guys.
For those who don't know Evergen, do you want to just give a brief idea of what you guys do?
Yeah, sure. So Evergen was formed by collaboration between CSIRO, who we all know, Government Science Research Agency, and AMP Capital, who is a big infrastructure investor, own chunks of network businesses in Australia and New Zealand, amongst other things. It was formed all the way back in 2015 as like a research project around what the edge of the grid looked like in Australia with the rise of rooftop solar. And CSIRO had a sort of pretty strong thesis that batteries and storage in a renewably powered grid would be important. And so Evergen was born around a little piece of software that at the time optimized a single home against a time of use energy tariff. So like predicting load, predicting weather, and optimizing between cheap and expensive energy on a time of use tariff, right? So interesting concept. And then what happened with Evergen was it started life actually as a sales and installation business. So before I got here, which was in 2019, the business was formed and there weren't a lot of batteries being sold back in 2016, 17, if you think about it. So the commercialization phase for getting this software out in the wild was all about selling and installing batteries to homeowners and to property developers. So we did a bunch of stuff with people like Mirvac. And during that process, I then arrived in 2019, not as an electricity person. At the time, I knew very little about energy, but I got involved because my background's in kind of building disruptive businesses and like fixing startups. I had quite a lot of experience in building companies with people in different industries. And so I sort of got offered the job to help Evergen fulfill its potential. And my first day was back in 2019, so 3 and a bit years ago now. And my vision was that it's obviously solar and battery is going to be everywhere, and it's a global opportunity, not just an Australian opportunity. And so what we did is we spent about a year really getting into the consumer journey around buying and installing solar and battery. And it's painful. And the solar industry, as you know, there's lots of good people, but there's some people selling crappy product they shouldn't be selling that doesn't really work. And so there's a sort of an industry reputational issue where quality is really important. And so we went through for a year, but basically selling and installing quite a lot of solar and battery systems and really getting empathy with the consumer, empathy with the installer. So we built a bunch of software products that make installers' lives easier and consumers' lives easier and make solar and battery work better. And then we stopped doing that about 2 years ago. So we don't sell any hardware anymore. We don't install any hardware. Everything Evergen does is software, connecting to devices using cloud APIs. And we went from just optimizing single houses against time of use tariffs to now optimizing almost 10,000 sites, mostly with batteries, against lots of different types of energy tariffs. So we talk about FCAS, we bid fleets into FCAS. We talk about wholesale exposure and spot market exposure. We run lots of different trading strategies for different retailers and networks and stuff. And we've been, I think, at the forefront of innovation there. We partner with nearly 100 installers who we accredit as Evergen accredited installers. So we kind of give them a badge of honor that says they're good people. We do client references. We make sure they sell great hardware, and we do first line support for nearly 10,000 consumers. So we're really kind of at the coalface, even though we're normally invisible. And
in the current market, though, you mentioned operating in the wholesale space and FCAS. We know that the wholesale prices have spiked, or they're very volatile. How do you manage that? It can be beneficial to a customer when it works in their favor, but can it be a liability as well?
I mean, it can, sure. Volatility brings risk. And certainly I would be cautious to be fully exposed to wholesale prices as a consumer unless you have a battery and unless the battery is big enough to absorb 2 to 4 hours of your house load, really. Most of the spikes that happen in energy prices, they're pretty short in duration. We generally recommend that someone who's, let's say, on a plan with Amber, maybe the smallest battery they should have is maybe 7 kilowatt hours, and they should probably have excess solar. to make sure that there's a fair bit of buffer there. But I mean, we have lots of customers on spot plans, and they've made hundreds of dollars in a single month through the way that we optimize against the spot market. Now, 5-minute settlement was great for companies like Evergen because it kind of removed the gaming of the 30-minute windows in the big plants. And we're able to do an extremely good job of like trading 5-minute intervals with home batteries. And so, I mean, I personally think like the way the market should evolve is that people, like if you believe what I believe, which is that there should be millions of batteries of all different shapes and sizes all around Australia to basically allow the grid to be renewably powered and largely reliant on wind and solar of all sorts of sizes. You need storage on shopping centres, you need storage in front of solar farms, which we're involved in. Like you just need it kind of everywhere. And that allows flexibility, but it also allows you to generate revenue and mitigate risk. And that's really what we see.
So Ben, did I hear something in there about demand management as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've always believed that if you can control when people use energy, as well as when it's stored or sold or bought, then you can optimize for cost, not just at an individual level, but across the system. So we're involved in turning a whole bunch of things on and off behind the meter in homes or businesses where people allow it. Now, Australia has not been particularly receptive to demand response, like as a thing. Like there's no consumer price incentives, there's no market for demand response. There are some subsidies and we've done some tests with various networks around like modulating temperature of people's air conditioners and stuff like that. But people in Australia haven't really embraced the idea of someone like me turning their air conditioner up at 1 degree on a hot day. But it's coming. It's coming in New Zealand. There's a 3-year plan to make it happen in New Zealand. In Europe, where we have some things happening, it's all been about demand response, much less about solar and storage in terms of the way the market dynamics
because
evolved.
a lot of our listeners are solar installers, solar companies who are successfully selling batteries now. So what's the jump like for them, first on a solutions basis, but also then just being able to sell it to a consumer? How big is the jump between doing a pure play PV and battery install and then coming across to doing something a bit more sophisticated like that?
Well, look, for the last, I'd say 2 years, paybacks on solar and battery systems sold together have been reasonable, like 5 to 6 years. We optimize single homes. People get a 26% benefit immediately with adding Evergen, which is free for consumers and free for installers. Like it's kind of our gift to the world. So I've been a defender of solar and battery paybacks when sold together. Like they work pretty well. Adding a battery, so retrofitting a battery, economics are slightly different, but they're getting better. And I think now, like what we see, and I was reviewing some analysis we've done of the ISP, so AMO's like forward-looking plan. And there's some predictions in there that are kind of interesting, right? There's going to be loads and loads of batteries, but only maybe 20-25% of them are predicted to be included in coordinated things like VPPs. And what that sort of suggests is 80% of the people that buy a battery, they're focused on independence and self-sufficiency and not being at risk of things outside of their control. We're here to kind of make these things better for everyone and ultimately more useful for the system. So we have it like in our fleet now, which is like almost 10,000 homes with storage. About half of them are not in a retailer or a network sponsored BPP. And that's cool. That's fine with me. Like these people have bills that are zero or often credits. That's great. Like I can understand the motivation to do that. And I think like with energy prices where they are now, and obviously we've got the war in Ukraine, has been a massive, massive shift in demand for fossil fuels and all sorts of energy. Like energy prices are much, much higher all around the world now than they've really ever been, I think, in many cases. The economics around getting an electric vehicle, if you could get one, or putting a battery on your house, if you could get one now, are better than ever. Like they really are. And people are afraid because like consumer spending is more than 10 or 11% of most consumer household costs at the moment are on energy. So people are thinking, man, I can't handle this. Like how high is it going to go? Like we've got government intervention on prices around gas that we talked about a minute ago. So I think now's the time. And we're certainly seeing amongst our sort of 85 or so partners around the country, they're selling more storage than ever before. And they're often selling it without solar or maybe with just an upsizing of solar. Like I'm a great believer in people having a bit more solar than they need. Because if you think ahead and you think, well, you might add an EV in 3 years' time or whatever it might be, then you need to have more solar than you think.
It's an interesting one that you should say that, Ben, because as an example, the Tesla virtual power plant, you're only allowed a maximum PV size of 15 kilowatts. And down here in Victoria, the last couple of days, we've had days that have yielded less than 1 kilowatt hour per kilowatt peak installed. As my own house, as an example, I've got 25 kilowatts on the roof. I had a day there that only yielded 8 kilowatt hours, and I've had a couple of days at 30, but I worked it out. I averaged for the month 1.7 kilowatt hours per kilowatt peak installed, but I'm not eligible for any of the VPP scenarios that are out there that I could find.
No, but you know what? You don't need to be, right? Because as a self-sufficient house, like that's a lot of solar. And do you have storage?
No.
Okay, well, if you had storage, then there's other like opportunities available. But your primary driver, this is one of the things I'm really passionate about, is like when people buy things that relate to solar and battery, like I think as part of that process, they should be asked what they want to achieve. So is your objective to have a zero bill, or is your objective to generate revenue and make money, but take some risk and maybe lose occasionally? Like, what is your objective? So a bit like when people go for financial advice and they do like a risk tolerance and an education questionnaire that sort of sets up what the financial advisor can sell them. I think when people buy solar and battery and then choose whether to be independent and just buy energy from a retailer on a time of use tariff and worry about their own self-consumption, like that's a legitimate goal to have from solar and battery. And VPPs, not all VPPs are good for everyone. Like we've got lots of experience. We've run more than 10 VPPs over the last 12 months with different retailers and different networks with different subsidies and different incentives and different market structures. And some of them are like FCAS driven, some of them are spot market driven, some of them are, and they don't all work. And the issue here, I spoke about this at Smart Energy in Sydney recently, is like the issue that we're all grappling with in trying to design and deliver VPPs that benefit everyone is that the consumer has to benefit almost to the fullest possible extent and get either more benefit than they would get if they were on their own, or some other reason for contributing so that they're sticky. And people are trying to tie them in through finance at the moment and various other incentives and discounts off the purchase of a battery. Like there's all sorts of ways of like binding someone in for 2 years, which I don't think is necessarily sustainable. I don't think everyone wants to finance a depreciating asset anyway. But the issue is in the sharing of the benefits. And so as an example, like if you try and run a VPP and it's backed by a load following hedge, you can't create enough value for the hedge provider and the retailer and the consumer and people like Evergen to benefit sufficiently that it works for everyone. Like it's just a losing hand. But on the flip side, if you're like one of the big utilities who own a generation stack and they've got a hedge book and they've got some wholesale exposures that aren't immediately obvious, you can create a heap of value by trading 100 or 1,000 batteries in unison against specific price signals, whether it be high prices or low prices, because you can create a disproportionate return against that wholesale position over and above what you could create against a load following hedge. So it's kind of like, I think the process that everyone's learning about is, well, like how to make these things work for the long term. And the big guys have a disproportionately unfair advantage in this space because they've got wholesale books and they've got generation assets that they can balance things against. And that's why, like, one of the things I said at the conference a few weeks ago was that like a bunch of things have changed in this space over the last 6 months. So some of them are outside of our control. So like the rise in energy costs driven by largely the war in Ukraine actually changed the game quite significantly for some people. And I think we see inbound inquiries almost every week from big installers wanting to be electricity retailers because they perceive there's a lot of benefit in doing that. And what we've learned is like it's actually really, really hard. And like if you don't have a really credible path to scale,
you need the capital, plain and simple.
You do, but it's not really possible to make it work in the long term unless you either own generation assets as well, or you've got other wholesale positions that you can create value in the market against. And that's the thing. And so I think like one of the things that we are passionate about at Evergen, right, is giving the consumer choice, providing the world-class, the best hardware at the best price possible, and then having the returns like pay back the investment as quickly as possible, right? And so one of the things we're bringing to market in a few weeks is we're going to basically go out to all our installer partners and we're going to recommend 3 or 4 retail electricity offers some of which may come with an incentive, some of which might not, some of which you might be able to just leave, but maybe you get all the wholesale benefits. So we're going to start offering, like, acting as a marketplace for good energy plans for people with solar and battery. And I think by doing that, we've got so much proof now, like thousands and thousands of systems traded and optimized against different recipes over the last 3.5 years. We can prove consumer value. We can prove installers benefit. Like, we're kind of here to help everyone maximize the return on these investments. And to be honest, like, being tied into a VPP isn't the right thing for a large proportion of people with batteries. Like, they're better off being on their own and keeping their own bills low and not contributing to the system. And that might sound like a weird thing for the CEO of a company that runs more VPPs than anyone else in Australia.
It does indeed.
But what I'm saying is, like, I think the energy system in 5 years' time, we might have like somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million batteries of different sizes dotted around Australia. They don't all need to be in VPPs for the energy system to be more resilient and more decentralized, and these people to be benefiting from that independence. But what we need is the flexibility and the interconnectedness, and we don't need people to be tied into plans to make that happen. Like,
now, you touched on the objection, though, using the example of the air conditioner being dialed down by 1 degree. I'd almost say that there's a cultural objection for a lot of people when you come and offer a solution like this, where they're not completely owning the asset, they're not completely in control of what they're doing. So how do you answer that objection?
Yeah, so we researched about 35,000 consumers who got solar on this point last year. And what came out loud and clear was like, we don't mind you doing these things to us. So we don't mind you turning the air conditioning up or down, and we don't mind you pumping it. Like, we don't mind you interfering with things in our home as long as we consent and as long as we feel like we get paid fairly. And so the issue in Australia is there's no market for demand response. Like, you can't, as a homeowner, like, sign up. Like, we'll very soon be able to connect to a whole bunch of devices in homes. Like, currently it's air conditioners and hot water and like the obvious things, but we'll be very, very soon we'll be integrated with things like Google Nest and Amazon Alexa and other things that will allow us to connect more things through a single thing. So where we're working towards is, like, in our app, which you can have for free and you can connect your house to, you'll be able to toggle on and off things you're prepared to allow us to do. And we'll tell you how much we're able to pay you for those things. And what will happen, I live in a world where energy markets around the world will evolve much quicker than everyone thinks. And like, Australia is a nightmare for regulation. It's like the regulation is always kind of 3 years behind where the technical ability to do things is. And that's partly because we've got more regulators than most places, and they don't always agree on what the path forward should be. But in countries where it's quicker and easier to make things happen, like I got an email yesterday from some very senior people in New Zealand who basically just said, look, we've got a 2-year roadmap for demand response. We want to be able to control all these devices in people's homes. Can you do that? And I'm like, yep, we can do that. Is there going to be a market-based incentive for it? They're like, yep, we're working on that. In Europe, where I had a call last night, they're already doing this in lots of countries in Europe, like turning load up and down, whether it's EV chargers or air conditioners or heaters or whatever it is. And culturally, people are cool with that. And maybe it's because they don't have we have this excess of energy in Australia. Like, people talk about the excess solar we have, which is a crazy thing to say. Like, we don't have excess solar. We just haven't got a system that can deal with it at the time where it needs to deal with it. And that's kind of the problem.
Energy costs are back on the front page again. We also have a new government that's setting some pretty much heftier targets in terms of carbon abatement. And how would you see these things being positive or benefiting our industry?
I asked this question of like, what do I think the new government's going to do for us about 10 times in the last week, which is good. And I'm personally I think change is really important here. So I think there's a couple of things worth commenting on. The first thing is, I think, like, the stunning wave of votes for the Teal independence, I think, really just demonstrate how discontented people across Australia are with the choices they've had. So I think that's phenomenal, like, for humanity. Like, I think as an Englishman by birth, I think we need these bipartisan cross-house, like, nationally aligned goals, a bit like they did in Germany or in the UK. Like, so I'm thinking the involvement of more independents will make that more likely. So I'm excited about that. I think in terms of Labor policies, like, there's a Powering Australia document, like a 57-page document. That's got some good things in it. It's got some things that I think are not a great use of time or money. So there's and maybe I don't know how specific to be about these things, but I think the big thing, like the big bucket of challenge in there that they've earmarked as grid reform, which they've sort of been specific around being transmission. Like I don't think transmission is definitely something we need, but I think if we could turn that massive bucket of money into innovation around the grid and the energy system and how to make it more resilient and more flexible. And maybe I think the big thing to tackle, which I'm not clear that a government will have the courage to tackle this one, but really the issue getting in the way in Australia is the regulation around the networks, the DNSP business model, the regulated return model. It stifles innovation in a way that it's not the network's fault. Like they're good people, but when you sign people up to a 5-year plan that you don't change very often, it's actually extremely difficult for them to do anything, and they can't spend enough money on innovation. We're kind of death by pilot across Australia. And I think there's obviously a lot of money at stake. And this is the biggest problem with the whole electricity industry generally, is like, obviously you've got the politics of it and the state politics of it. You've got all the embedded infrastructure and the billions of dollars tied up in what should be stranded assets. And obviously we're seeing things like with AGL, and there's all sorts of things at scale. But then you've got the incentives of the people that own these businesses. And like some of these networks were privatized, some of them are still owned by government. Like if you've got superannuation fund money tied up in networks, and there's people like me going, well, is the role of the network and the retailer, is it legitimately correct? Like around the world, if you do a study around the world, in lots of places around the world, the role of those two companies does not exist. It's one company. And there's no competing interest. Like we see rules that are like the networks are curtailing solar as an example, as a way to manage network stability, because that's their job.
You could argue a good example of that is WA at the moment. Let's talk about the Swiss grid, which is Perth in the southwest, which is still operated by a state-owned DNSP or grid operator, Western Power. And unless you're a large commercial customer, you're not contestable. You're with Synergy, which is a state-owned retailer. So they've brought in tighter and tighter requirements around what you can and can't do in terms of installs. Without going into the technical side, it adds complexity, it adds cost, and feedback from installers since last round of changes is that, it really kills a lot of the work that they're doing.
Sorry, so I'm aware of some crazy things that have been regulated in WA.
It is justifiable from a grid operator's point of view, but it doesn't connect with the technology.
Agreed.
So on the retail side, so we've been fortunate, there's only the indexation or the movement on the cost is only 3.5% because it's predictable and the government's thrown in $400 for all the people. But in the same breath, they've reduced the feed-in tariff to $2.50.
WA have been able to experiment much more actively than people in the NEM. So we've seen a lot of community batteries. We've seen large-scale demand response trials. We've seen relatively large-scale projects like Project Symphony that Evergen's involved in and stuff like that. So they're able to innovate more rapidly, and they have access to capital because it's state capital in a way that in the NEM, like, we don't. So it's great. And congratulations to all the people involved in this in WA. Like they've tried lots of stuff, which is great. Including island and communities, which is something I'm really passionate about. I think like you should give communities at the end of lines, like you take whole towns off the line if you want, with solar, battery, maybe a diesel generator, maybe a hydrogen electrolyzer and a fuel cell. Like there's ways you can do this. And I think that they've made some really good progress with that. And there are some really, really crazy regulations that don't make sense that I'm aware of. So like obviously Evergen's primary focus is optimization around storage in homes and businesses or whatever scale. There are some crazy rules that basically, and again, I'm not technical in this sense, so you forgive my relatively sort of stupid explanation of this, but some rules around like when you can even discharge energy from a battery to house load or the grid in WA, which is just ridiculous and completely not required when you can optimize batteries the way we do or the way Tesla does. Like they're sort of regulated for the lowest common denominator in a way that it's completely counterproductive for the whole system and for the installer. And it's just like, kind of like, I don't know if you ever saw this show in England where there was like a very funny comedy sketch where they'd just go into a bank and the computer would just go, computer says no. It's just like, no, don't do that. Consult with industry. And like one of the things AMO's done in recent times, in particular in the last 12 months, is the attitude to industry consultation has been excellent. And like, it's painful, but it's been excellent. And they've actually listened, and we've felt heard. And we've got some of the most amazing electrical engineers and technical people in energy in Australia. And we've made a real effort to contribute, even though we're a small player. But we've done it on the basis that like what we're advocating for here is benefit for the system and like a transition that's orderly and effective and doesn't lead to bad things happening. And so I think like congratulations to the team at AMO. Like we're making progress, but I'd still like it to be a lot quicker.
What are you working on new? What's innovative at the moment?
Yeah, well, so we've quietly been building a solar farm optimization and control and monitoring platform over the last 12 months or so, which we're now independently controlling 16 small solar farms across the NEM. And we're sort of trading different recipes around making solar farms more profitable. We're in the process of adding storage with some partners to different solar farms, and also working on like large scale hydrogen electrolyzers on solar farms. We spent a bit of time doing some stuff around wind farms. Like, so we're now officially, and I can tell you this today, we're officially like doing utility scale stuff too, which is great because it means
awesome.
Like we can control large scale generation assets and optimize at that end of the value chain. And we can also control things in people's homes and businesses and optimize all the way through. So like my original vision coming to Evergen was that like you could use software to determine where electrons go all the way through the value chain and maximize the benefit from that. And so we're doing that. There's a really big relationship that I'll be able to announce probably in a couple of weeks, which I will do, which is leading us into quite exciting projects in 3 or 4 countries around the world, which is great. And that'll be a blend of like utility scale stuff and new business models around storage in C&I and also residential properties in different markets. And so everyone's kind of like looking at Australia for education. We've got such a complicated system that like people can just take part of our solution and deploy it in a country. And it's like much easier than dealing with some of the complexity we have here. So like I'm, I guess, excited about starting to take some of the things we've been building over the last 3 years to other places with partners. And like our focus as a business, like we're on installers. Like installers are the most important part of this whole industry, not just in Australia, but elsewhere in the world. Like whatever happens in the industry, like installers are going to benefit. There's going to be a lot of growth in storage, but also rooftop solar is still going to be growing. So we've got products and platforms and tools that'll be rolled out gradually to our accredited partners over the next probably 6 months. So we're always happy to work with more people. And I can think the other thing is now we can say that we integrate with probably 9 out of 10 of the most used inverters and storage devices around Australia for sure, adding to the list all the time. So again, we're just trying to help everyone sell and install more stuff and have it work better for longer.
That's a huge vision, man. And what's going on in Newcastle? I mean, you guys are there as a tech centre, switched in, a base there, I think, as well.
Yeah,
I mean, is this forging a new tech centre in Australia?
I think Newcastle's awesome. So I moved up there about 5 years ago and then moved back to Sydney when I took over at Evergen. And then we were fortunate to be able to go back to Newcastle because it was like the spiritual home for Evergen. It's such a great place for innovation. So we've got obviously lots of manual industry and the biggest coal export port in the world. And there's like this very earthy heritage in Newcastle, but really progressive government. Like the council in Newcastle have been very progressive around smart cities. The university's awesome, lots of good research coming out of there. And now it's like an hour and 40 minutes from Sydney. Quality of life is like a lot better. Like I've got nothing against Sydney where I sit today, but like Newcastle's awesome. So we're seeing lots of tech companies move people from all around the country. Like we're sort of equally split between Newcastle and Sydney, and then we're about 25 people overseas at the moment. So I'm an advocate for Newcastle. Like our office looks out over the coal ships coming in and going out every day. And so with our mission to kill coal-fired power stations, like we kind of sit there and go, we're going to get you, but it's a slow old thing. So yeah, it's good. You can come and visit anytime.
Awesome, man. I think you are going to get them. So collectively, we all are. Agreed.
I think it's inevitable. Like I've got now 6 kids, 3 of my own and 3 of my wife's. And I look at them every night when they go, how was work? I'm like, they're kind of like, are you winning? I feel like we're all collectively winning and we get just a little bit faster all the time. Like I think Ukraine's been in some respects a setback, but in some respects it's accelerated people's concern globally about energy independence. It's had some bad consequences, like even places like Germany have started mining coal again and turning back on some coal-fired power stations they decommissioned. But you know what rising energy costs do is they make it much easier to justify large-scale investments in renewables. And when you look at the numbers, like we need a phenomenal amount more energy, more electricity over the next decade. And the rate at which I'm seeing large-scale investments and large-scale projects like basically deployed around the world is much quicker now than it's ever been before. And so I feel like it's getting better, but do I think we're going to do enough? Probably not. Do I think people will artificially drag things out too long? Absolutely. Do I think 1.5 degrees warming is inevitable? Absolutely. Am I worried about that? Absolutely. And I think we all should be.
That's about all that we've got time for today. Ben Hutt from Evergen, really appreciate you coming on today, Ben. It's been very insightful.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's been excellent.
Cheers, Ben. Awesome. Thank you.
See you. Thanks, Karl.
Thanks for listening. We hope you got some benefit out of it. Please subscribe, share it around to anyone who might get benefit. Thanks a lot.